All right, hey everyone. Um, I am putting together a video which is a little late, but I'm going to be spending today getting caught up on all my teaching stuff. I've been slammed with different tasks and trying to keep my head above water with my three classes. I got a grad seminar and two undergrad classes, and they're all different. And right now is when all the grading's happening and assignments are coming in, and so my apologies for being a bit behind in terms of grading and in terms of video content creation. I have canceled all of today's appointments and commitments, and I'm going to be staying home just to get caught up on videos, grading, all the things that I've been struggling to get to. So we're going to start with probably a pretty short video on the week's readings for this business of the spectacle, Guy Debord. When I first decided to go in this direction, I was looking up Debord's work and trying to figure out which reading might be best, and the Society of the Spectacle itself is this really interesting and curious kind of document, but it's really hard to kind of pull a selection out because it's just a bunch of theses. How many theses? It's like 100 or something. In any case, it became a little bit cumbersome to try to think about having you all read that. And so I came across this other piece, which is a really nice job of sort of summarizing and explaining Debord's work, but also kind of updating it, right? So this one is 5 years old, August 2016. So it's even a little bit kind of out of date for our times, but it's much more relevant in terms of how it's thinking about Debord writing back in the 60s and moving ahead and where we're at today. So just a couple of main ideas that I want to cover in here, and then I'll move on to the captology stuff, which is coming next. Also, there's a video that I linked to another explanation of Debord's work in the Society of the Spectacle and some of this sort of related ideas about situationism. And this video comes from a British fellow who has a channel where he tries to explain certain theories, philosophies, and so on. And it's pretty good. I like this guy. So do check that one out as well. And between the reading and the reading prompt and the two videos, hopefully we have a pretty good coverage of these ideas. And I don't think there's anything terribly shocking or new here, but there's some nuances that are worth emphasizing. So Debord was writing, like I said, in the 60s, and he was coming out of a time of like explosive disruption. The end of the 60s, 68 in particular, was when our country, our culture, well, I was up in Canada, or I wasn't even born yet, but I would have been. But the United States political culture really exploded. The Vietnam War, civil rights protests, students' protests. This May 68th kind of began on campuses with students who were pissed off and concerned about, what we sort of still call the military-industrial complex, like the relationship between industry and government and the way that wars happen in, far-off places because it's good for business, it advances national interests, but it's destructive and corrodes the souls of the citizens. And so there was this massive explosion of frustration with political corruption, economic corruption, the dominance of the military-industrial complex. And this was the kind of the context that Debord was writing in, and he has this spirit of kind of radical critique of what was becoming more and more dominant, this capitalist system that was reaching further and further into every kind of nook and cranny of life. What was going on in the 50s and 60s, of course, we have television is now a real kind of mass technology. Advertising on television, advertising in magazines, on radios, in billboards, right? And so the advertising complex is becoming more dominant as commodification was becoming more dominant, more things that we need to buy, more brands that we need to be aware of, therefore more ads that we need to be consuming, right? And so this business of the society of the spectacle is a critique of the kind of the mediational surface of capitalism. That's probably a good way of thinking about it, right? So it's the kind of the ad industrial complex, advertising industrial complex, and how, in order to advance your business's interests, in order to move products, you've got to create imagery, dangle this imagery in front of potential consumers, right? And it's about seducing them, and it's about enticing them to try your product and to have an experience, right? And so there's always this rhetorical seduction that's happening with advertisements. I mean, obviously, we know this. What is an ad? It's an attempt to get you, to persuade you to try something, to buy something, to have something, to experience something, okay? And this is just becoming more and more prevalent throughout the 50s and moving into the 60s. And so you're coming out of a time of like radical social critique, political critique of kind of the way things are going as they are. Obviously, there's, Black Panther movements, there's gay and lesbian movements, there's, the students' movements in general kind of covered a lot of ground. There's just general frustration. It feels a lot like the moment we're in right now of like people saying no to taking jobs because conditions are terrible, and like frustration over inclusive practices and opportunities and all the rest, right? So I feel like right now we're a kind of a version of what was happening back in late 60s. And obviously we're in a much different context, and we'll get to that in a second here. But Debord was really kind of concerned about this business of spectacle, right? So you create, by whatever means, rhetorical means necessary, you create images and narratives and sort of you tap into the desires of consumers in ways that are trying to get them to lean into your company, to buy it, to experience it, to go there, to do it, to have it, right? But this is becoming increasingly pervasive and increasingly intensified. And so Debord is responding to this, and he's trying in his own way as a kind of a serious man, because what he's doing is this piece here actually invokes Lippmann's phrase, the pseudo-environment. And Debord was kind of like extending Lippmann. Don't forget, Lippmann was writing, 4 decades prior. He was not talking about spectacle. He wasn't talking about advertising. Lippmann was talking about just basic like reporting, news reporting, journalism, storytelling, how it is that we kind of get our information from like legitimate sources. But he was concerned about even that. Now, Debord, 4 decades later, is concerned about a more insidious and a more intensified version of a pseudo-environment, which is this kind of spectacular surface of capitalism that's coming at us increasingly from all angles, right? We walk out the door in the morning and we've got stuff kind of flying at us. We got stuff on the sides of buses, on bus seat benches, and, just like everywhere you go, there's stuff coming at you. At the time, this was a pretty new phenomenon, just in terms of the kind of qualitative allness, everywhereness of advertising. This felt very new and strange and unpleasant if you were someone who was concerned about capitalism and rampant consumerism and the treatment of workers and the treatment of, of the environment and all the rest of it, right? So the glossy surface of consumerism is always this kind of happy, exciting, infinitely possible kind of realm of imagination and fantasy and shock and flattery and on and on and on, right? And this is all spectacle. And what's kind of interesting of this reading is, Debord, when he was writing, was kind of concerned about the image, right? Up until television, mass media, advertising, images were rarer, right? It's like, even photography was a much slower kind of process, analog photography, right? So along comes the image, pictures, billboards, right? Pictures on the screen, pictures in magazines, right? And this business of the image that's now starting to circulate more and more was of concern, because images, as we know, are sort of different than words. They convey a lot of complex emotions, but they can also be interpreted in many different ways. And so the image itself became a kind of source of concern. And because that's the kind of the surface of this whole spectacular phenomenon that Debord was frustrated by. So basically, be on guard against the image, against the kind of the tyranny of the image, and how we are being seduced and sort of like almost attacked, like gone after. Everywhere we go, these things are kind of chasing us down. Again, this is late 60s. This is way before the arrival of the internet, and the way that the advertising complex has taken over the internet has brought us to a wholly different kind of place. So that's the next point. Let's see here. Just want to check in with the prompt. Distracting and pacifying the masses. Yes. So distraction and pacification, right? Like distract us with possibilities, pacify us, keep us from asking questions. Well, we'll get to there in a second. All right. Spectacle reduces reality to an endless supply of commodifiable fragments while encouraging us to focus on appearances. Yep. Advertising manufactures new desires and aspirations, right? It's trying to always let us know that this is a thing we need, we want, we must have, right? And so this business of like created wants or created needs, I often ask myself, like, how many more things can we invent as a society? How many more commodities, objects, especially now that we're in this digital realm? It's just like, how many more things can we digitize? I'm still remembering an advertisement for a digital, like, soccer ball or basketball or something like this that keeps track of how many times you bounce it. Like, what the hell? But, you create the need, right? You need a basketball that lets you know how many times you bounce it. Even those, like, Apple Watches that tell you how many steps you take. Really? We need to know how many steps we take? Like, it's just the created needs, the created wants. Like, here's a thing that you didn't have, but guess what? You need it and you want it, right? And so it's this kind of endless chasing of consumers by trying to, tap into their desires and their longings. Number 5 here. The spectacle, which is driven by economic interest and profit, replaces lived reality with the contemplation of the spectacle. Being is replaced by having, and having is replaced by appearing. This is also known as the tyranny of the image. Having is replaced by appearing. Obviously, this idea is much more relevant today, this idea of appearance and of attention, right? And so the visibility of one's involvement in the spectacle is becoming more and more pervasive. Get to the rest of it there. So the thing I guess I wanted to extend, the main point that I wanted to make about this piece is thinking about the journey of this class, and I'm thinking in particular of Lippmann and his pseudo environments, right? So what we're doing here is we are kind of showing how that original general semantic serious man desire for clean, discrete, tidy elements that all line up correspondingly, language, thought, myself, yourself, the external reality. It should all be tidy, well-ordered, something that we can understand and map, and we can get facts about what's happening. And if we are careful, we can speak clearly about those facts and order, right? And what we're seeing throughout this class is just how messy that framework actually is, right? And so with Lippmann, we get this business of the pseudo environment, which is really about narratives and reporting and storytelling. But now we're going further, and we're seeing how it is that, like, our kind of entire environments, the totality of the kind of the surface of our social worlds are kind of painted over by spectacle. It's hard to get away from it. And that actually gets to this important idea on, it's like the final two ones here, 10 and 11. He says, one of Debord's most cited passages, the ninth thesis, in a world which really is topsy-turvy, the true is a moment of the false, right? So the idea here is that everything's tipped over. Our real world is covered over by the kind of paint. It's been painted over by spectacle. Ads, pictures, images, right? Stuff that's always trying to come at us, whether it's on the radio. Now think about podcasts, think about music that you're listening to, and how it is that every platform is constantly throwing ads in your ear. You try to watch a YouTube video, 15 times throughout this video, you've got to watch some stupid ad for some stupid product, or you have to buy the membership so that you don't get the ads, right? But either way, they got you. And this whole kind of fishbowl of spectacle is now where we are. And my argument is that the reason we don't really talk about Debord so much anymore is because his critique has kind of become historically dated. He was concerned with images. We don't really talk about images so much anymore. That was like 10, 15 years ago. And so my argument is that spectacle has gone from the realm of the image to the realm of even deeper. It's now into the realm of information. It's now into the realm of actual platforms, right? So what is Facebook except they call it a theme park? And it's free. You're welcome to come into this Fantasyland theme park. It's free. Come on in. We welcome you in. When you're in, we are going to surveil you every move you make. Every time you sneeze or scratch your forehead or go to the bathroom, or every time you get hungry and buy a soda, like it wants to know everything so it can hand this information over to advertisers so that they know how to find you. That's the whole game. Facebook is a platform that hoovers up your personal data and lets advertisers have access to that data so that they know who to go after. And I've actually looked into this because I wrote a paper on and persuasion on these social media platforms. And I actually went into Facebook's advertising section. If you go down to the bottom of Facebook and you click on the kind of the business ad part of it, it takes you to this whole different world, this whole different kind of palace of clicks and links. And it is so wild. I wonder if any of you have actually tried to advertise on Facebook, because what it does is it basically says, all right, what do you want and how much do you want to spend, essentially, right? So we have access to everyone, basically, and we know everything about everyone. So if you're looking for, 13 to 18-year-olds, boys who are interested in this kind of a video game and their favorite flavor of Mountain Dew is purple or whatever, then we will find those people for you, and you just tell us, how much you want to spend in terms of like us going after them. So it basically guarantees you persuasive results. But along the way, it's curating your experience. It's funneling you into the places that you have shown Facebook that you prefer to, based on what you click on, based on how long you watch things. Everything's coming at you in a customized fashion, right? So that you stay longer, so that you're getting the experience that maximizes your engagement on the platform. It makes it really hard to get away. So there's always stuff that's coming through your feed that's directly targeted for your, confirmation biases or whatever. So I'm arguing that all of that, the very experience of being on a social media platform, Facebook, Instagram, I mean, my goodness, Instagram is images. It's just pure kind of spectacle all the way through. And now we've got TikTok, and it's all dancing and goofiness, and it's sort of the pornification of all forms of mediated communication on these platforms. So my point is, it's less about the images at this point, and now it's like this kind of immersive total experience that when we are engaged on the internet, on the social media platforms, even when we're watching a YouTube video, here I am making a YouTube video, right? It's like, I love YouTube. It's so informative. There's so much great stuff there. But still, you can't get away from all the bad attempts and like the annoying attempts to kind of yank you in this direction and yank you in this direction, and ads. And the whole thing is keep you online, learn more about your habits, behaviors, preferences, values, likes, dislikes, and then the ads start coming, right? So once again, it's still about ads. It's still about advertisements. It's just that they're working in much more powerfully, I would say, pervasive and insidious ways, because our deepest predilections, preferences, biases, desires. These things are being monitored by really powerful AI engines, and they learn a lot about us. And then they just turn around and tell the advertisers, all right, here's the people that you want to go after. Here's how to find them. And so the whole experience has become spectacular in that way. And so if that's the case, if when we are on our phones, if when we are surfing the web, that's the old phrase, if we're on the internet, on the net, which is like, when are we not at this point, right? And so it's becoming very, very difficult to kind of parse the differences between the pseudo environment or the spectacular environment and real life itself. I know this might seem like a kind of fuddy-duddy comment at this point, like what's real, what's not real, but you do the history of this kind of stuff and you realize that there was a time that was very different, and it wasn't that long ago that things were very different in terms of your ability to walk out of your house and not be assaulted by constant, attempts to get you to engage with something, buy something, watch something, dangling in front of your eyes, right? I wonder if you guys ever feel just completely exhausted and drained by it all. Like every time you leave the house, go do anything, you have to kind of battle all of these like, hey, try this. Hey, have you thought of this? Hey, like the people when you're walking in the mall and you have those people who come up to you and they're like, hey, can I ask you a question? It's like that times a gazillion everywhere you go, in your ears and your eyeballs, spatially when you're walking around, this thing's coming at you. It's like ads. It's like, come on, man. So I sympathize. It's just sort of like, well, what are you going to do? I mean, here we are. It's so completely sort of surrounding us. So the last thing here, this number 10 and 11, if our kind of entirety of our environments are false, the general semanticists, I think, would say, like, basically everything that we surround ourselves with is manufactured, it's false, it's that verbal representational realm, right? Then, number 10 here, in a world which really is topsy-turvy, the true is a moment of the false. So what seems false is actually a moment of truth. It's a moment of like rupturing past this fabric of spectacle. I wrote the word swerve here. In my own work, I write about swerve as this kind of, this moment of unanticipated kind of directional change, right? And you can think of like your ability to sort of go off script and go away from and refuse and reject the spectacle because it wants you. It wants more of your desires. It wants more of your purchasing dollar and your time and your consciousness, right? So your ability to kind of swerve away from that, like to say no or to reject it, or if something happens in your life that's really maybe tragic or sad or happy or whatever, but it kind of bumps you out of this sort of swirl of imagery and spectacle, then he's saying that's a moment that's actually true because it hasn't been engineered, it hasn't been manufactured just to kind of grab your consciousness and hold on to it for as long as possible. So what can we do in the face of ubiquitous spectacle? Debord promotes the concept of deterrent, diversion, detour, reroute, hijack, a means of interrupting the fabric of the everyday. That's this idea of the swerve, right? So he was involved in the situationist movement, this kind of art, politics community in the late 60s that was trying to do this very thing of like, look, every part of our lives is being run and regulated by capitalism and by imagery and by the need to buy and sell and purchase and all the rest of it. So what we're trying to do is create happenings. We're trying to create spontaneous eruptions of newness, of new forms of connection. You might remember Jackass, the show from, I guess it was the early aughts, maybe. I think they did 3 or 4 movies, maybe. These guys they're sort of frat boy types, but they're doing something that's similar to the situationist thing, which is like wildly spontaneous and bizarre, hijinks, and they go into public spaces and they wear costumes and they're trying to just like wake people up in some ways, right? And kind of create these moments of explosive possibility. That was this idea of situationism. So I don't know. How do you get out of it today? How do you extract yourself from the tentacles of spectacle, especially when it comes in the form of information about elections, information about viruses, information about them, information about what's actually going on. I mean, you could say, forget image, now the actual knowledge that's coming to us through these platforms is itself spectacular in the sense that its sole function is to kind of keep us glued to the platforms where advertising can work its magic over us, right? Meanwhile, what's happening to our thought processes? Meanwhile, what's happening to our relations to one another? What's happening to our sense of peace and calm inside ourselves, right? We're in bad times with anxiety, depression, mental health, right? Everyone's sort of freaking out about their relation to others, and all this stuff's being mediated by these platforms, which are stoking our sense of insecurity and fear and pride and vanity and all the rest of it in really intense ways, so that we stay glued to these things so that we can have advertisements dangle in front of our eyes. It's really depressing kind of framework. Not every single platform is like this. Some of the ones that you pay for, right? Like you pay for Netflix. You pay for Amazon Prime, and so you get less of it. But there's still ads baked into that, and there's still all these same processes, these algorithms that are all constantly trying to figure out your implicit, unconscious, deep down kind of preferences, biases, desires. So it's the same kind of basic process. It's just some of these platforms you pay for up front and you get fewer of the ads, right? But in any case, it would be interesting to see what some of these authors like Lippmann and Debord would say about our fascinating world that we have now, because there's no stopping in terms of the new digital realm and the virtual realm. And I think I've talked about the metaverse and like what's that going to be all like. So happy times. But in any case, this is an interesting moment in history where the critique and the analysis of this kind of pseudo environment is becoming sharpened, because the environment itself is becoming intensified around image, spectacle, desire, tapping into all this stuff. And so where is the possibility for objective, serious man, fact-based analysis of what's going on when so much of what's coming in and surrounds us is distortion and it's yanking us this way and that way? It becomes very hard to maintain your true line, you know? So again, we see the complications of the wishes of the general semantic serious man approach. And I'll stop there, and then we'll move into the captology stuff, which is fascinating and troubling in its own right. So onward.